Hello guys, and welcome back to the channel. So now guys, I start this narrative off with a very simple question, a stupid question even you may think, but of course bear with me. And that question is, who is the president of Nigeria? A stupid question, as I said, you may think, but it really isn't. The president of Nigeria, as you may think, is not actually Malam Buhari. Of course, I'm sure all of you deep down know that. Malam Buhari is a docile elderly man in his 80s who is frail of body and health and is of no real competence. Even in his full fitness, he was never of competence, but especially now is of no real competence to run the state of affairs of Nigeria. The president of Nigeria is not also his vice president because he's not powerful enough and is not of the tribe that is ruling the country at the moment to be of any effectiveness. The president of Nigeria is a chap called Abba Kyari. A lot of you know this and some of you may not, but if you don't, then be aware now. The president of Nigeria is a chap called Abba Kyari. So with that guys, I bring you this. Exclusive, Buhari's team in disarray as NSA Monguno declares war on Abba Kyari. So there's now infighting amongst the Malamis, and they're now starting to cannibalize themselves, and they have been cannibalizing themselves for a while, I must say, but now especially so now because it's now going to the top of the echelons of their society. So again, the headline, exclusive, Buhari's team in disarray as National Security Advisor Monguno declares war on the de facto president of Nigeria, Abba Kyari. So now let's now see what manner of infighting is going on amongst the Manamis. Nigeria's National Security Advisor Babagana Monguno has accused President Muhammadu Buhari's Chief of Staff Abba Kyari of undue and dangerous interference on matters bordering on national security. Consequently, Mr. Monguno has fired a warning memo to all service chiefs to desist from taking further directives from Mr. Kyari, according to documents obtained by correspondents. Mr. Monguno said Mr. Kyari's directives to service chiefs were sometimes issued without the knowledge, much less approval of the president, a practice he said has added to government's failure to contain insecurity. Chief of Staff to the President is not a presiding head of security, neither is he sworn to an oath of defending the country, Mr. Monguno, a retired Major General, said in a December 9, 2019 letter. As such, unprofessional practices such as presiding over meetings with service chiefs and heads of security organizations, as well as ambassadors and high commissioners, to the exclusion of the National Security Advisor and or supervising ministers, are a violation of the Constitution and directly undermine the authority of Mr. President. So now, of course, we've all always known that Mr. Buhari is ineffectual and really a docile old man of no real function within that space, and the real de facto president of Nigeria has always been, pretty much since the inception of this administration, has always been Abba Kyari, and now the upper echelons, the inner carcass of their Fulanism, their Malamism, is now coming out now to cry out because of the infighting amongst them. So there are bits that we'll put in the slideshow for this, or I might not do a slideshow and just do like a pictorial thing as the template or the banner for this video. But however, I'll try and show as much information as I can just so you are in the loop as to what is going on here. So it carries on. Such acts and continuous meddlesomeness by Chief of Staff have not only ruptured our security and defense efforts, but have slowed down any meaningful gain that Mr. President has sought to achieve. Mr. Monguno's letter comes as insecurity returns to center stage as a major cause for worry amongst Nigerians. Violent attacks linked to bandits, kidnappers, armed robbers, and vandals have continued to claim multiple lives and properties across the country. The president has repeatedly promised to curb the crisis, many of which he met in office, but has largely failed, like his predecessor, to curb. Security experts, opposition and federal lawmakers have responded by advising Mr. President to fire his service chiefs. So now here's now a copy of the leaked memo or the purported leaked memo that underpins this article. So I shall put that as the picture for this narrative. So here is what it reads though. Here's its content. Office of the National Security Advisor, the Presidency, etc. So it goes on to quote the address, and here is the theme of the letter: disruption of the national security framework by unwarranted meddlesomeness. So this is how this particular memo has been titled, and here is its content. References A and B were sent in response to the request for presidential intervention to sustain internal security operations of the police within the shortest possible time. However, the contents of the two references were in variance with Mr. President's verbal directives. Consequently, ONSA, so ONSA is an acronym for something, probably the Office of the National Security Advisor. So consequently, ONSA scrutinized the document further and sought clarification from Mr. President, who has directed that reference B be disregarded by all parties as it was sent without his endorsement. Number 2. Whilst it is expected that all heads of security agencies, having spent many years in service, would understand the means of passing directives from the President, Commander-in-Chief of the Armed Forces, it may be necessary to remind all, in the face of the glaring breaches to that procedure, for clarification, other than direct verbal directives from the President, written directives emanating from the President will be conveyed with a copy of his manuscript directive, or at a minimum bear his signature. Additionally, Mr. President may convey directives to the heads of defense and security apparatus through the National Security Advisor, who chairs the Intelligence Community Committee, Joint Intelligence Board, and General Security Appraisal Committees on behalf of the President. So now that is now really the memo. This is an alleged memo, by the way, because this is just coming off this publication, which is I think it's a Premium Times that is publishing this one. So this is according to what was published, and this narrative, of course, is based on that memo that these people are alleging that has reached their hands. But of course, this memo tallies with the general perception of the Nigerian space that the person actually presiding over the Nigerian space is, of course, this Abba Kyari person. So it carries on. So this is now the body of the article now. The service chiefs have been unable to rein in Boko Haram insurgents since 2015, when Mr. Buhari named them to take charge of various arms of the nation's security architecture. Whilst previously held swathes of land have been taken back from the terrorists, deadly attacks on civilian and military targets have worsened since 2018. The Chief of Army Staff, Tuka Buratai, said in recent media interviews that the military has degraded insurgents' capacity to attack Abuja and other cities outside the war-ravaged northeast. National security sources told correspondents on Monday that fresh memo showed how Mr. Kyari has helped in keeping the service chiefs in office despite overwhelming calls for their ouster. It also underscores the frustration faced by Mr. Monguno and others who found Mr. Kyari's influence over the president too domineering for national benefit, sources said. So this is another copy of a written, probably memo. I think this is a follow-on. And the supervising ministers of defense and security agencies, it should be noted that the chief of staff to the president does not direct the security apparatus of the Federal Republic of Nigeria. His job as it relates to security stops at conveying Mr. President's written directive. Number 3, similarly, you are reminded that the Chief of Staff to the president is not presiding over security, neither is he sworn to an oath of defending the country. As such, unprofessional practices such as presiding over meetings with chief of staffs and heads of security organizations, as well as ambassadors and high commissioners, to the exclusion of the national security advisor and all supervising ministers, are a violation of the Constitution and directly undermine the authority of Mr. President. Such acts and continuous meddlesomeness by the Chief of Staff have not only ruptured our security and defense efforts, but have slowed down any meaningful gain that Mr. President has sought to achieve. So now, this is number 4. As professionals, you are aware that the security of the Federal Republic of Nigeria requires concerted and centralized effort, taking into account internal, external, and diplomatic factors. It is therefore detrimental to our collective security that the Chief of Staff, who is a non-supervising minister, holds meetings with diplomats, security chiefs, and heads of agencies. Now, number 5, pursuant to the foregoing, you are by this letter directed to desist from these illegal acts that serves nothing but continuous undermining of our national security framework. Any breach of this directive will attract the displeasure of Mr. President. And this is signed Baba Monguno, Major General, retired. So of course now this is it can't be any clearer, but then let's get just through this first, and then we'll have a discussion about it afterwards. Mr. Kyari and 2 presidential spokespersons, Femi Adesina and Garba Shehu, did not return requests for comments about the memo on Monday afternoon. Read below the full context of Mr. Monguno's letter, which was copied to the President and Ministers for Foreign Affairs, Defense, Interior, Police Affairs, and Mr. Kyari himself. So that is effectively the cut and thrust of it. It's open warfare now within the Aso Rock space, because not that long ago we saw that video clip that was leaked by one of Mama Daura's daughters, who was challenging Mrs. Buhari, Aisha Buhari, within Aso Rock for dominance of that space. So she was actually challenging this woman for dominance of her matrimonial home. So we all saw that viral video, and we all saw that verbally and visibly how angered Mrs. Buhari was, and we all then knew that these people were actually living in Aso Rock, directly sitting on top of the mind of this docile elderly man, Malam Buhari, who doesn't really know anything. So it is now imagined now that this Abba Kyari person is the person that is actually sitting in meetings with the security chiefs of the country. So the person that should be sitting in meetings with the security chiefs of the country should be, of course, the commander-in-chief of the country. So if Abba Kyari is sitting in security meetings with the security chiefs of the country, then he is to all intents and purposes and in effect the de facto president of the country, because it's the president of the country that will sit on top of the army chiefs and the security chiefs, nobody else, because nobody sits above those level of functionaries. So if this person is now supervising those meetings, then that tells you effectively that is the de facto president of the country. So if he's the de facto president of the country, then what is the role of Malam Buhari? This is the question. Conversations in the comment section, come give me your answers to this question, because the answer is obvious to me, but I'd like to know what you are making of it. But before you come share thoughts, click on the red subscribe button so it turns gray. Bell button notifies you every time I drop a new video. Then come tell me who you think is the president of Nigeria, Abba Kyari, Mama Daura, or Buhari. Definitely not Oshibanjo, so let's just leave him out of the list, because he's just Friday, your messenger boy, go and make tea boy. So is it Mama Daura, Abba Kyari, or Malam Buhari? We know it's not Malam Buhari actually. Let's just leave Malam Buhari, because everybody knows that Malam Buhari is not really is just a public face, is the face that they put forward to keep the Janjaweeds faithful. So is it Mamman Daurado or Abba Kyari who's the real president of that country? This is the question. So I'll leave you here. Carry this conversation on with you in the comment section. But here I say peace.